To continue the conversation with one of the most knowledgeable people on the energy field, he is John Hofmeister, the former CEO of Shell Oil. He joins us live by satellite in Washington, D.C. Mr. Hofmeister, so glad you could join us.
Thanks for having me.
I might want to also add that you're the author of a new book called Why We Hate the Oil Companies, and also head up a nonprofit group called Citizens for Affordable Energy. Let's start by talking about Deepwater Horizon here. As a former executive of a multinational oil and gas firm, should BP have ever been drilling for oil off the coast in that deep of water?
Well, I think the industry has a pretty good track record, as does BP, for drilling in deep water safely and securely and responsibly. We have to find out what precisely went wrong on the Deepwater Horizon, because it is an unforgettable and an unnecessary tragedy. In the scheme of things in the deep water, over 40 some odd years, over 35,000 wells in the Gulf of Mexico, over 2,200 deep water wells, they've all been safely drilled by many companies. There's a protocol, a procedure, a discipline, a regulatory scheme, a licensing scheme, an inspection scheme. They all work, but something went wrong. Something went seriously wrong, and we have to find out, was it individuals who made bad judgments about equipment that was flawed, equipment that was broken? Was it poor judgment? Was it malicious? Was it negligent? Or was it just incompetence? But people died. The Gulf has been horribly polluted. And we have to get to the bottom of whatever happened, wherever it takes us, however long it takes.
So the flip side of this argument, I think for a lot of people, they would say, you know, the easy oil is gone, that what is left out there in terms of fossil fuels is so hard to get, so expensive to go chase after, that it's almost not worth it. Is there any merit to that argument from your point of view?
I hear that argument all the time, but it's fallacious. It's fallacious in the sense that people think we're running out of oil. We're not running out of oil. That is a mythology that is perpetrated by people who, for their own reasons, don't like hydrocarbons. And I understand people who don't like hydrocarbons. I wrote a book about it. But the reality is we've spent 100 years building a hydrocarbon economy. For us to move away from the hydrocarbon economy means we need a plan. And there's been no administration since Nixon, including the current administration. There's been no Congress since the Congress during Nixon's time that have come up with a plan to change the way we use energy in this country. And until we do that, we'd better go drill the oil that we have domestically, of which we have plenty, and we have really to consider the unconventional oil as well. But until we have a plan to move away from the hydrocarbon economy, we can't just export our risk, because that means we're importing more oil. And so developing our own natural resources, creating American jobs, developing American resources, I think makes sense until we have that plan.
Is it amazing to you, as somebody who has been in the business, that you mentioned Nixon, we're going back 35 years, that there's been no comprehensive national energy plan? Russia has one. The Chinese have a very modern, updated energy plan. We can't even seem to talk about energy without shouting over one another or demonizing one another. Does that concern you greatly, being there in Washington, D.C.?
Absolutely. That's why I'm here so often, and it's why I wrote my book, Why We Hate the Oil Companies. I named 3 problems in the book that stand in the way between us and a plan. 1, political partisanship. We've got to deal with political partisanship because we have to do what's right for America, not just what's right for the Republicans or the Democrats. What about the America we all live in? Secondly, politicians think in political time, 2 years, 4 years. That's all that matters. They don't think about decades into the future and the society which we will be 10, 20, 30 years from now. They're worried about the next election, while energy people think about the next decades. So they don't communicate well with each other. And thirdly, the U.S. government is so big, it is so complex. Do you know there are 13 executive branch agencies that govern energy and the environment, and 26 congressional committees, plus every court in the land? They all govern energy, and they're all disconnected, fragmented, different priorities, and totally politicized. And so we have to do something different to get a plan for the future, and that different is what my book is all about.
Well, how are we going to do this, Mr. Hofmeister? I've had conversations with people at the highest levels of government, people who have been in the Environmental Protection Agency, like Christine Todd Whitman, who looks at me very fearful, saying, you know, if we don't do something in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we could be looking at what you have called an energy abyss 10, 12 years from now. Is there any truth to that?
I get more worried every day because every day that passes that we see more partisanship and more dysfunctional government, we get closer and closer to an energy abyss, which looks like gas lines, gas rationing, brownouts, blackouts. Particularly, all of this will happen on the East Coast and the West Coast and the upper Midwest, because those areas have the least energy investment and are the furthest behind the curve in terms of keeping up with demand that continues to grow. And that will not be a happy life. So what we have to do is change how we govern energy. My book describes how we can create an independent regulatory commission set up much like the Federal Reserve is set up, where politics of the day doesn't matter, where subject matter experts are appointed to a board of independent governors. All this is created by law. All the appointees are presidential with advice and consent of the Senate, so there's still a democratic government oversight over the Federal Energy Resources Board, as I call it. But it's a board that could operate independently to do 4 things. The first is more energy from all sources. The second is more technology for efficiency. The third is more environmental protections of land, water, and air. And the fourth is to build infrastructure where we need it to move energy from where it's produced to where it's consumed. Those big commanding heights, those big rules of how we govern our energy future enables us to have a short-term plan, a medium-term plan, a long-term plan that's not upset because we change Congress, because we have an election every 2 years. And then, therefore, we can get the continuity and the consistency that we need to build a new energy system for the 21st century.
One of the things that I find fascinating about the group that you've started, this grassroots level organization, is sort of the disconnect that everyday people have from their energy needs, the energy they consume, where it comes from, how cheaply it really is in the scope of things. There's a huge disconnect between what we use and the reality that's out there. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, absolutely. We suffer from a lack of information across the nation. And so I started Citizens for Affordable Energy for the purpose of raising everyone's awareness in easy, understandable language. Sometimes the electric companies and the oil companies, they make it too complex for people not in the business to understand what the business is all about. But putting it into everyday convenient terms about what we use, how much we use, how we could use it more efficiently, how we could protect our environment without all kinds of governmental programs in place and so forth. These are very, not simple, but they are basic concepts which we can explain in simple terms so that people can get connected to it and really enjoy the process.
You are in favor of moving away, slowly but surely, away from fossil fuels, are you not?
I am, because I think we're smarter than the burning of fossil fuels. That's an old technology from the 19th century. I believe that technology and human knowledge and science and the application of science gives us the opportunity to go in completely different ways. We'll never use all the oil and gas and coal on Earth. We won't need to, because there are many other forms of energy that we could develop commercially and affordably, and they do less harm to the environment. So why wouldn't we put our minds to the work at hand and get on with it? We can get rid of the internal combustion engine. That takes away 40% of the demand for oil, and replace the internal combustion engine with hydrogen fuel cell technology, with battery technology, and have just as much fun tooling up and down the highways, visiting all of the great resorts that you have in your state, for example. We don't need gasoline. The gas stations can convert to hydrogen from gasoline. So they're still in business. We still have the mobility we love. You can go over 300 miles per tank full. It's time to move on.
You were talking to legislators, you were talking to congressmen, you were talking to public policy officials. Do you feel, will they speak to you candidly and say, I get what you're saying, but I have these folks back home and I can't do this or that? I sense an enormous amount of frustration up there with people who do this for a living, that they just feel stuck.
They do feel stuck. The folks back home are who they're working for. So often, so many of my conversations turn on the notion that while I know what the folks back home are interested in, I have a party leadership which is going another way. And if I don't support my party leadership on this action or that action, I ultimately will harm the people back home because I'll lose my committee chairmanship or my committee preferences, because you got to follow party discipline. It's the politics of the party and the partisanship of the party which is holding back representatives who are hardworking, loyal public servants, holding them back from doing what the people want. And I think that's where we see, whether it's the Tea Party or the other frustrations that we see across the American political landscape these days, it's this party partisanship which is just alienating so many ordinary, everyday people.
We have to leave it at that. John Hofmeister is the former CEO of Shell Oil, the author of the book, Why We Hate the Oil Companies, and look up his group, Citizens for Affordable Energy, online. Mr. Hofmeister, as always, a great pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.